We moved to Portugal last year, and something that we're asked about a lot is what it's like to go through the process of getting a residence visa in Portugal. People ask us, what is it like? What can I expect? Where do I even start? Should I hire somebody or try to do it myself? So in this video, we're sharing step by step the process that we went through to get our residence visa, what we learned, and tips to help you in your own process of applying for a visa in Portugal.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Dawn.
And we're the Unretirees. And last year we decided to not put off our dream of living abroad and traveling until retirement, but instead to live abroad and work remotely. And today we live and work from the Silver Coast of Portugal. And this channel is about living abroad, flexible income, and travel and adventure over 50. It sure would be great if you liked this video, subscribe to this channel, and click the bell so that you are notified of any new video that comes out. You can also connect with us on Instagram at The Unretirees, as well as sign up for our free weekly newsletter. We'll leave the links below.
So if you're new to the channel, here's a quick timeline of our story. We originally purchased a property here in Portugal in 2022, and the plan was to rent it out for 5 years until we were ready to retire in 2027.
Well, so after a year, we decided that we didn't want to wait until retirement to actually move, and so we decided to live and work remotely. And so we started this process of actually going through the visa process in August of 2023. Now, by this time, we'd already sorted out several things that were important to the visa process. I mean, we already had done scouting trips, so we knew we were going to live. We had already selected a place to live and purchased it, in fact. We had a Portuguese tax ID number called a NIF, and we already had Portuguese bank accounts.
So we already had a lot of this sorted, but we did start the actual process of applying for a residence visa in August of 2023. So in this video, we're going to share how the process is supposed to work, our experience of how it actually worked, as well as lessons we learned along the way to share with you. By the way, we moved to Portugal from the US, so this is the process based on moving from the US to Portugal. If you're moving from another country, of course, this process will look different. So this is a quick overview, but if you want more of a deep dive on moving to Portugal, you can schedule a one-on-one call with us. We also have a Moving to Portugal course that we'll be releasing. You can sign up for the wait list to be the first to be notified when that goes live. We'll leave links for both of those things in the description below.
We'd also love to hear from you. If you've got questions about moving to Portugal, or if your experience in getting a residence visa was different, we'd love for you to add your comments in the comment section below.
The first step is to schedule an appointment with VFS. Now, first, let's talk about how this is supposed to work. Here in the United States, many countries contract with VFS to act as an intermediary for resident applications. So what happens is that VFS is responsible for scheduling appointments, collecting documents, organizing those documents, and submitting it to the consulate. So in this way, the consulate doesn't have to do any of that direct work with people applying for visas. It's all handled through VFS. So let's talk about scheduling an appointment. There are 5 VFS offices in the United States. They are located in Houston, Miami, New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. There are also satellite offices in Newark, New Jersey, Providence, Rhode Island, and New Bedford, Massachusetts. Now, you can't just go to any VFS office. You'll actually go to a VFS office that is assigned based on where in the country you live.
All right, so then you schedule an appointment online. You go to vfsglobal.com to set up that online appointment. And it may be easy or it may be difficult and challenging. A lot of that is going to depend on the demand in that specific office and the staffing in that office. And that's going to dictate how soon or how far out in the calendar you're going to have to go in order to set your appointment. Some offices just do more quickly than others. That being said, you don't have a choice. It's based on where you live. You're stuck in the office that you've been assigned, and there's no flexibility to that. This is why we recommend starting with this process and starting as early as possible, because the appointment that gets scheduled for you could be months out.
Yeah, and it's worth noting too that when you schedule that appointment online, you will need to pay a fee. I believe we paid $60 for each of us for each appointment.
That's right.
So that's how it's supposed to work. Let's talk about what we actually experienced. We made the decision to move in mid-August, and that's when we logged on to VFS Global to try to schedule an appointment. However, unfortunately, the earliest appointment that was available wasn't until mid-November. Now, we wanted to move on October 4th because we had some commitments that we were trying to work around. So we decided to do something that is not recommended, which is just to show up at the New York office with our documents and hope that someone would see us. We are told that this never works, but we were kind of in a predicament and we decided we had to try.
So as Dawn said, we just showed up at the New York office and not surprisingly, we were turned away. They weren't willing to see us. However, before we left, one of the workers there suggested to us to come back on a specific day at a specific time. And so we did. We got there and it was first thing in the morning on that day, and we arrived before the office opened up. Through a series, we'll call it, of coincidences as well as confusion on their part and our part, we were in fact able to be seen. It was highly unusual. A walk-in is just never successful in New York, but somehow we finagled it. From your standpoint, I think it's probably best just to set an appointment as quickly as you know that you're going to want to start this visa process.
So some tips for the process. Number one, we highly recommend starting here as your first step, only because it can take weeks and sometimes months to get that appointment scheduled, especially if you have an office that is experiencing a lot of backlog. Another tip is that if you cannot get an appointment quickly, or if there are no appointments available, just keep checking the website every single day. There may be cancellations or people rescheduling and something could open up. Another thing that we would recommend is that if you are applying with a spouse or with multiple family members, you may have more luck scheduling those as separate appointments. And as a last resort, you can try showing up at the office like we did. We think that hardly ever works. That's the information that we have. I think we just got lucky, but we definitely recommend going the appointment route as a first step.
So the second step in this process is to gather all of the documents for your VFS appointment. So let's talk about how it's supposed to work. There is a certain set of documents that is required depending on the visa that you are applying for. Now, we applied for a D7 visa, which is a retirement visa, but you could also apply for a digital nomad visa or one of the other visa options. However, most of the documents you're going to need to pull together are going to be the same for all of them. It's just that some of the other ones may have some additional things. These include completing forms, gathering copies, multiple copies of statements and other things, as well as requesting additional documents, and the purchase of travel medical insurance. So let me give you a list of some of the documents that we needed to provide. For our D7 visa, we needed to provide proof of assets, so bank and brokerage account statements. We needed to provide proof of income. We needed to provide proof of travel medical coverage. We needed to demonstrate that we had a place to live, so a lease contract or a purchase of a place. We needed to provide photocopies of identifications, or our driver's license, our passports. We needed to provide a copy of our flight itinerary of when we intended to fly to Portugal. We also needed to have a Portuguese tax ID number, a NIF, and funded Portuguese bank accounts. Now for us, we already had the NIF and the Portuguese bank accounts when we purchased the house, so this was not a new thing, but this is a thing that's required when you go for your VFS appointment.
For these last two items, which is the NIF and the bank account, you can definitely do this yourself. We decided to use a company called Bordr to get our NIF. They made it very fast and easy. They can also help with setting up bank accounts. We'll leave a link in the description below.
So a couple of other things. So there is an application to complete, and you can go to the VFS Global website and download the Portugal visa application. And you should fill that out, even though when you arrive at your VFS appointment, they're going to pull out a fresh one and fill it out, or you're going to fill it out along with them. But at least if you have filled out the application ahead of time, you know exactly the information that you need to be prepared to give to them. The second bit of documentation that you're going to need to work on acquiring is an FBI background check. So there's an application to send this in. You also have to have fingerprints that are done in a specific way. So you mail that in, and then you will get an email that says whether you've got a background problem, which is probably the end of your visa application, or you're cleared to go. And then they will mail you an envelope with your background check in it. Now, it's very important that you don't open up that envelope, because when you deliver it to VFS, it has got to be sealed. It's got to be in that sealed envelope. Now, for us, of course, we did get an email that said that we didn't have any problems in our background. But it is important that before you arrive at your VFS meeting, that you have gathered all of these documents in an organized way so that you can be prepared at this meeting.
So that's how it's supposed to work. Here's how it actually worked. Well, the process went pretty smoothly, and I think a big reason for that is that we relied heavily on the information that is available in the Americans and Friends PT Facebook group. The whole process of gathering all of these documents and getting our FBI background check took about 2 to 3 weeks. So what are our tips for this process? Well, one of the questions that we are often asked is, should I do this myself or should I hire someone? And we would say that most of this process is going to be about gathering documents, and you're going to have to gather the same documents whether you hire someone or do it yourself. So I don't know that there's a lot to be gained by hiring someone. I think the exception is if you have some sort of extenuating circumstance that might make your application a little bit more unique or harder to navigate, maybe that makes it worth it. But in our opinion, you're going to end up doing the same amount of work either way.
So let's talk about step 3, which is your actual meeting with VFS to pass over your paperwork. So this is how it's supposed to work. In a big picture, you deliver your information to VFS, they package it and they send it off to the Portuguese consulate, and then somewhere in the 30 to 90 day window of time, you'll get an email back that says that you have been approved or not approved. So let's break into a little bit more detail about submitting your paperwork. So you'll have your appointment with VFS. I suggest that you get there about 30 minutes early. There's a guard normally who makes sure that you have an appointment, so they verify that, and then you are able to go into the VFS office. You get a number, you wait for your number to be called. When your number is called, you sit on the other side of a desk from an agent who will help you fill out a new form, and then they will ask for certain documentation, and you pass that documentation as they ask for it. And then once that's done, you pay a fee. On the website it says the fee is currently about $45 per person, and that's really it. If you don't have some documents, this is why this is important. If you don't have some documents, they ask for things that you don't have, they're going to hand you back your documents, and you will have to set up a new appointment, which may be weeks or months out.
Yeah, that's exactly why it's so important to rely on the information like in Americans and Friends PT, so that you can go through the checklist and make sure that you have absolutely everything in order going into that appointment. Well, here's how it actually worked for us. Again, we didn't have an appointment, we just showed up, but we showed up 30 minutes before the office opened. Once we were able to get in and get seen, the process was really very smooth. It took under an hour for both of us, and I would say that the process was very positive and very efficient.
So let's talk about some tips for the process here. So the first thing is you've got to be organized. It's very important that you have your documents organized and that they're ready to go when the agent asks for it. So what we did, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but we did is each of us had an accordion file, and in each of those little areas of the file, we had a set of the documents that we were going to need, and each of those documents had a color-coded Post-it note tab on it. And then we also had in each of ours an index that was color-coded as well, so that when the agent asked for a specific document, we could look at the index for what color that document was and pull it out of the accordion file and hand it to her. This worked really well. Now, one of the things that's also a funny thing is that even though, like for us, we have a joint financial account, each of us needed to have a set of the last 3 months of bank and brokerage statements. And so, you just sort of have to have that. So when it was her turn, she had to deliver exactly the same set of documents, but that's just part of the way that it goes. The second tip we would have is really log on to Facebook and join this American and Friends PT Facebook group if you are considering moving to Portugal. Not only does it have a whole lot of great information about just moving to Portugal, there are specific files for different aspects of your move. And one of those files, and it's the one that we relied on very heavily, had to do with getting your visa, getting your Portuguese visa. And it has checklists and all sorts of information that is very, very good. So I suggest that you do that. The third tip, honestly, just be patient. You know, you may show up at the office and you may get your number and you may sit there for 10 minutes waiting for an agent, or you may sit there for 2 hours waiting for an agent. It's just the deal. You just sort of have to be patient and roll with it. And I think part of the thing that's going to be true with all of this documentation and bureaucratic process, and it's true in Portugal, but honestly, it's also true with most other places, including the United States, patience is actually an asset through these processes. And so the fourth tip is, if in fact you want to do it, this is an optional tip. In most offices, they will offer to take your passport and put that along with the documents that they send to the consulate. So that way, at the moment that it's approved, the consulate can put the visa approved sticker in your passport and mail it back to VFS. We did not do that because we didn't want to be without our passports for an unknown period of time. And especially since we were planning, you know, we had our appointment, or we met our VFS agent on the 31st of August, but we were planning just 6 weeks later to fly to Portugal anyway. We needed to have our passports. So you don't have to leave your passport. You can certainly take your passport with you.
So the next step is just waiting for your approval. Now let's talk about how this process is supposed to work. Once you've submitted your paperwork to the VFS office, then you wait, usually in the US, for your approval to come through. That usually takes 30 to 90 days. It can be shorter, it can be longer. Once you are approved, you'll receive an email. Once you receive that email, you can take your passport into the VFS office to get your visa. Now, if you have left your passport with the VFS office when you submitted your paperwork originally, they can just mail it to you. Now, some offices ask you to take your passport directly to the Portugal consulate. Some ask you to bring it into the local VFS office. That will vary just depending on which office you use.
And the time will be different as well. If you have the option to go to the Portuguese consulate in your area, you usually can drop it off in the morning and pick it up in the afternoon. But if you have to drop it off at a VFS office, it's going to be a week, 10 days before that passport is going to come back to you. So let's talk about how it worked for us. So I know we are throwing some dates around here, but we had our appointment on the 31st of August, and we had a flight booked on the 4th of October. And so we had basically 5.5 or so weeks in order to get this approval, which was going to be on the shorter window of time of the 30 to 90 days. But we were hoping, right? We were hoping that we were going to get it, but we didn't. And so we flew to Portugal anyway. We knew that we could be in Portugal for 90 days just as a tourist anyway. We weren't really worried. We thought, you know, 30 to 90 days would mean that we should have our approval by the end of November. But if we had flown, but flying to Portugal on the 4th of October meant that we actually had till like the very early January before our 90 days were up. So it was not going to be a problem, we thought. We just flew to Portugal with the idea that we would get an email that said our visas were approved. We'd fly back to the United States. We would deliver our passports to the VFS office. We'd have to wait for days until we had them returned back to us, and then we would return back to Portugal.
So we moved to Portugal, and October passed and we didn't get our approval, and November passed and we didn't get our approval, and December passed and we still didn't have an approval. And then finally, at the end of the day, on the last business day of the year of December, my approval came in, and it was a total of about 120 days from the time that we initially applied.
So that was just inside the 90-day window of time. We actually had spent a few days outside of Portugal, so we had probably till January 5th or 6th in order to make that work. So her approval came in just in the nick of time. And of course, I was convinced that my approval was just going to happen later that day or the following week, and it didn't. And so it got to the point where it was day 89, and for me, day 90, and it was like, I got to get out of here, right? So I flew back to the United States and I waited there until I got the approval, which took another probably 10 days, I would say.
A couple weeks, yeah.
Yeah, until I had the approval. For me, well, Dawn's was about 120 days. Mine was about almost 140 days to get the approval, which was certainly a whole lot longer than was expected. But once I got the approval, I had my passport. I had actually taken Dawn's passport with me as well when I returned to the United States. And I delivered those passports to the VFS office. About a week or so later, I got them returned by Federal Express and hopped on a plane back to Portugal.
So from the time that we decided to move until we were approved, it was about 6 months, about 5 months from the time that we actually applied. But that wasn't the last step. There's still one more thing to do, which we'll talk about in a minute.
That's right. But some tips for this process of waiting is, man, you just got to be patient. One of the things you would find out if you attempted this process, and you may anyway, is you can contact VFS to check status, but the only status they'll give you is that they submitted it. They're not going to call the consulate. They're not going to really check. They're just going to say, we submitted it to the consulate. So you're not going to have any idea of where you are in the process. You could try calling the consulate. They're just going to send you back to VFS without any answers. So there's really not a way for you to know, other than that it's been submitted, for you to know where this is in the process. There's not a way to have any expectation that it's going to come in the next week or the next month. It's going to take however long it takes, and you just need to be patient for that. One other thing is that while your VFS appointment that you have to deliver your documents does need to be in person, when you're delivering your passports to them, you don't have to do that in person. In fact, you can mail your passports in and then they will return it by mail. The trick in this is that it does need to be mailed from a US location and returned to a US location. So it's not a thing where you could be in Portugal and just decide you're going to mail your passport in and have them mail it back to you in Portugal. It just doesn't work that way. But I got to tell you, between watching the calendar tick away and the fact that you've got a life in Portugal that you're wanting to get to, this whole thing is very, very stressful. I'm glad it's behind us, but it was a very stressful window of time, just because there's really nothing you could do to try to advance the ball any further.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit more stressful because we were already here. We had a house here. And I just remember we kept turning to each other and saying, wow, it's so beautiful here. I hope we can stay. So. So the next step is the AIMA appointment. So let's talk about how this is supposed to work. The visa that you get back in the US is actually only good for 120 days. So between the time of your approval and the expiration date of that visa, you need to meet with the immigration office here in Portugal, which is AIMA.
Now, in most cases, when you get your passport back from the VFS office, the visa is actually a sticker that is inside one of the pages of your passport. And on that sticker, there may be, and there should be, and there was for us, a URL that has, if you follow that URL, it has a pre-booked appointment for you, a day, a time, and a location for you to show up for your AIMA appointment. Whatever you do, try to keep that appointment. Otherwise, you could have a difficult time setting an appointment. Now, if you do need to set a new appointment, you can call the AIMA, or if your visa sticker does not have a URL on it, then you'll have to call the AIMA, and you'll just have to call them every day if you need to until you can get an appointment.
We just can't stress enough that everyone we know who did not have this appointment already scheduled for them had a very, very difficult time getting through to the office, getting an appointment that was available. So that's why we say, if there's one thing that you take away from this video, it is when you get that appointment, we do not recommend moving it. Just move every mountain you need to move to make it to that appointment.
That's right, and you have no control over where that appointment is going to be. Fortunately, Portugal is not a huge country, but it could be, your appointment could be hours away, and frankly, you just need to do what you need to do in order to make that appointment work, if at all possible. The other thing that's a little bit of a trick is that if you are going with family members, each family member needs to have an AIMA appointment. And we were fortunate that our appointments were on different days, but we are aware that there are some couples who had appointments on the same day, but in two different offices that were a long way apart. So that just created some challenges for them. The way that then it works is you show up for your appointment. You need to bring virtually all the same documents that you brought with you to your VFS office. You'll meet with your agent at the AIMA office. They will ask you for documents. You'll hand over the documents. They'll take your picture for an ID card, your temporary visa card, and then you'll pay a fee, and then you'll wait 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, and you'll get your visa card in the mail.
Here's something that we really wish we would have known about this process, and that is that our appointments were on different days, but my appointment was 3 hours, 3-hour drive from where we lived, and Matt's appointment was 2.5 hours in the total opposite direction. And the reason that I mention this is that your appointment may be in a place that's not that easy to get to. So we've had people that we know who've moved here who don't have a car, who've had a really hard time kind of figuring out how to get to their appointment, whether that's renting a car or begging a friend. There is bus service in Portugal, but not necessarily to some of the places where these offices are, or not easy to access. And so that's something to be prepared for. It's something that I wish that we were a little bit better prepared for. It wasn't a problem. We had a car, but it was an all-day thing. That's something that I think is important to know. So how this worked for us? Well, the good news is that once we actually got to the office, again, this went very smoothly. We were able to get right in. Very positive, very efficient process. Took, I don't know, 15 minutes or something. It was pretty fast. They take a picture for your residence card, and that residence card, they will mail it to you. And once you receive that, that is good for 2 years.
Yeah, and they actually didn't even ask for all the documents. They just asked for a handful of the documents that we had, but that was okay with us. It still worked.
Yeah, all the same documents that we brought to VFS, we brought to AIMA. And Matt's right, they didn't ask for all of them, but it was important to have them because we just didn't know what it was that they were going to ask for. And they didn't ask Matt for the same documents they asked me for, which again is why it's so important just to have that whole folder really well organized, and it will make your appointment go much more smoothly.
So let's talk about some tips for this process for the AIMA meeting. So the first and most important tip is, if you have an automatic appointment set for you, do whatever you can to keep it. Because the second tip here is, if you don't have an appointment or if you need to change it, you just need to call first thing in the morning to the AIMA to try to get an appointment set. And that, you may be calling every day for weeks before you actually are able to either
months,
before you can get through to somebody and before they can set an appointment for you. So you just need to be persistent at this. The third is, make sure you bring all your documents that you brought to your VFS meeting. Make sure you bring all those same documents with you to the AIMA meeting, because although they didn't ask us for all of those documents, they could. And so you just need to be prepared for that. And finally, look, this is the end of the process. Once you have had your AIMA meeting and delivered those documents and had your picture taken, you have reached the finish line, and you are, actually, you're a Portuguese resident. Now, it's going to take a couple of weeks till your card comes in the mail. But once you've done that, you are a Portuguese resident. And so it's time to be excited, go out to dinner, have some champagne, whatever it is that you need to do to celebrate that.
Yeah. So that was our experience, but we'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have about the process of applying for a visa in Portugal? Or have you gone through the process? We'd love to know more about your experience. Tell us in the comments below. Also, just a reminder, if you want more information about moving to Portugal, you can book a one-on-one call with us. We also have a Moving to Portugal course that we'll be launching soon. We'll leave a link in the description below if you want to join the wait list and be the first to be notified when that goes live. Also, if you want a breakdown of how much it costs to actually move to Portugal, watch this video.